Welcome to episode 31 of Randall Vision. I'm your host, Randall. Today's topic is Eddie I. The last episode was kind of setting one up on a tee for me for this one. The point I made at the end of the last video is kind of where we're picking up here. Eddie I, we'll start at the beginning. Eddie I was my bully growing up. We lived it was the same block, but a couple streets apart. I was on B Street, he was on F Street. And then after I grew to dislike him, I always thought, of course he lives on F Street, because that's the F word. But some run-ins as a little kid, like, I don't know, we'd fight on the playground in grade school. And also out in the neighborhood. I've talked myself into telling this one. I don't know if I ever really told this story to anybody. But, I don't know. Single digits years old, like, 6 or 7 or 8, something like that. Old enough to be wandering around the neighborhood unsupervised. Back in those days, that would have been like late 80s. And I had this, it was like a piece of tube that I don't know if I found it in a junk heap or stole from a construction site. I don't know where I got this tube, maybe at home. But when I'd swing it around, it was hollow, so it would make a noise like a lightsaber or something. So me and my imagination went out, slaying monsters or whatever. And Eddie I came across him wandering around whipping my whip, and he wound up taking it off of me and hitting me with it, and it left a welt across the back of my legs. And I went home crying to tell my parents, but I was ashamed of telling the story the way it happened. I didn't want to get in trouble for well, what the hell are you doing roaming around with a whip? So I made up kind of even a worse lie, that I think I had a little pocket knife that was like a bottle cap opener and one cheap little blade on it. And I said he took that off of me and then he cut me with it across the back of my legs. And the story doesn't even make sense. Like a crappy little knife wouldn't leave the same welt as a plastic tube. But it's kind of like a beer bong tube, if you ever built a beer bong. But I don't know. I don't know if anything ever came of that. Well, he and I butted heads a lot. There were parent-teacher conferences and all of that. But for periods of time growing up, I guess he'd get institutionalized once in a while. So then I wouldn't see him for a while if he was, in a juvenile detention center or whatever. Some weird side notes. I was 1 day older than Eddie I, or am 1 day older than Eddie I. And we were both in the gifted program in our school system from a pretty young age, that we were both some of the smarter people. So I'm not going to bore you with all the details of me getting bullied, but on into high school, this is where the story starts coming to a head. In English class, 10th grade, I always sat right by the door. I couldn't be bothered by taking more than 3 steps to enter a room to get to my seat. That it would allow me, when the bell to ring, to be the first one out into the hall. It let me sit closer to the board because I always had vision issues or glasses or whatever. And too, like, I was always there to learn, so being up front helps for that. But and so in 10th grade English, I would be in my seat. He would walk into the room and he would pick up everything on my desk, like my book and my notebook, textbook and notebook, and pick them up and chuck them across the room. And he would do this every day. And the teacher was in the room and said like nothing. Or maybe not every time, but like she witnessed it, enough times for it, like, maybe this is a problem. But so I just suffered silently with that like, wouldn't show any reaction, calmly go and pick up my stuff after it was. So after having long enough of this not being addressed by the teacher, eventually I went to the school's office and explained the problem. And their solution was to move me to a different slot, like shuffle my class schedule so that I'd no longer have English during that period. So that happened and things went along. And then so Eddie, I was offended by that he couldn't pick on me anymore. So then he was more intensively waiting for me at the bus stop when we would get home. Now, meanwhile, we only lived like, I don't know, mile and a half from the school, and the bus stop was halfway there. So at that point, like, you could have just walked the rest of the way up the hill. But so yeah, he'd try to fight me, harass me, make fun of me, whatever, whenever we'd get off the bus. So that was unpleasant. Eventually I went back to the offices like, hey, here's the new problem. So once or twice they sent the school security down to tail me home to see, what the problem was. And Eddie, I would see the security and take off instead of harassing me. And then as soon as they didn't have the resources to keep doing that. So as soon as they weren't there, he'd resume. So here I am in the spot of like just getting bullied. I've already tried the proper channels to have the bullying addressed. I never felt like sticking up for myself. Or if I would, it wouldn't go well usually. There was once or twice I got the best of him on the playground as a little kid. That like he'd come running at me and I'd just put my foot up and it'd run into it, that kind of thing. But so I was kind of like out of options at this point. I was like, well, shit, like, nobody can help me in this situation. What am I gonna do? And an incident started again. He's trying to harass me, and I said, look, dude, I don't know what your problem is. I don't know, you want attention or something? Like, how about, do you want to like smoke some weed and play some chess? And he was like, yeah. And then we did. And then we were friends for the rest of his life. In the eulogy video, I make a big speech about how you're not supposed to whitewash somebody's legacy after they died. Eddie I was not a good person. He was pretty fucked up. He was top tier. I'd give him an S tier on the being fucked up scale. Just to sum him up in one word, I would call him irreverent. I think occasionally he would be malicious, but the majority of his dysfunction was in the name of like humor, levity, or spontaneity. He's a wacky dude. He would just scream and holler like, in inappropriate times, always saying the most uh, goofy stuff. Like, oh, you got that, uh, what, lettuce and a cabbage. Dude, let me get some of that cabbage. I want the cabbage that makes my toenails itch. Um, uh, I can't really. I'm not sure if I'm in the right frame to do him justice on all the humor stuff. But like, I don't know. He was a dude. We would do stuff. We swam across the catfish pond. The only time I ever took a dip in the catfish pond was Eddie I convincing me it was a good idea to swim across it. Um, Not exactly a good idea, but we did it anyways. Um, just mostly hanging out. Did play a good bit of chess. Little little later down the road, we would do a lot of small stakes poker. Maybe me, him, and another dude, Joe Drunk. The one time we played cards for like a couple hours, and like we were all still sitting at even. We're like, this is stupid. One of us needs to win. So we started playing cut for high card for $1, and then that was still kind of dumb. We're like, okay, $5. All right, cut for high card for 10. Cut for high card for 20. And like, meanwhile, back then, like $20 was like you could buy something with $20. So we did it a few rounds, and I wound up the winner. Joe Drunk was down. I think Eddie I broke even or something like that. Or maybe I was up 40, Eddie I was up 20, and Joe was down 60. And so we just made plans for like in the next day or two that I went and got us like a quarter ounce of mushrooms, and uh, Eddie I bought the pizza, and all three of us hung out and ate it or whatever. Um, yeah, I think it was weird that I could remember details. After everybody had left that day, I got down with a Yusef Lateef record, and it was just like a real cool vibe. Anyhow, uh, where's this story going? Oh, so tying this to the last episode, to befriend the bully, I learned that from watching Goku. That without that influence or role model, I may never have come to that conclusion. Like, the course of my life would have been a different thing, and instead of doing that, had I, met him with force and, or learned some martial arts so I could protect myself and beat him up and what. Yeah, I could have did that, but I didn't. I did what I did, and here we are. Um, so everybody was reckless in our teenage years and early 20s, and I'm not sure when the opioid epidemic began, but one of the first people I knew that got into opiates was Eddie I, and he got into Oxycontins. I think at the time they were selling for 50 cents a milligram, and it'd do the shit out of him. And quite irresponsibly, many of us, or not many of us, but some of us would say shit to him like, hey dude, why are you wasting your money on Oxycontins? Heroin's a lot cheaper. And he'd say, dude, you don't know what's in a stamp bag. These Oxys, they're from a pharmacy, or this is made in a lab. I know what's in this. But enough time goes by, and The oxy addict can't afford the oxys anymore, and then they start buying heroin and they start shooting, and um, that's that's the road Eddie I went down. But so there's he's not the only person like um I mean, I think I even copped dope with him before. Um, and there were other dudes in the community, some that may have looked up to me at the time, even though I wasn't trying to be a role model. And they would say to themselves, well, if Randall does heroin, then it must be pretty cool. So I'm going to do it too. And I don't know if that's a fact or not, but like to assume that it's a non factor, I don't think would be fair either. And I'm not trying to saddle myself with guilt over this, but like just owning up to the part I've played in the lives of others. Um, but I don't know. Like, yeah, he had a rough go of it. Sometimes he'd do crack with the heroin. He's into pills, all the polysubstance abuse. That's a lot of what people I know would do. Just like, oh, drugs, yeah, I'll do them. Um, but eventually he got Hep C from shooting, I think, and eventually he kicked it. And we were like happy for him. We're like, cool, dude, you're off junk. Sure, come hang out. We'll hang out, smoke some weed, whatever. And I think it was just a couple of weeks into him being off of it, he wound up. I guess it was an OD. I'm not sure if we got. I think the story I got was that it was a combination of pills and alcohol, but with a compromised liver, it was enough to put him under. More than a couple dudes I knew haven't made it this far. Um, I don't know exactly how I feel about that because it could have easily been me instead of one of them in the variety of ways that I know people have checked out. And I don't know, like why was I friends with somebody who was a bad person? I mean, like he didn't even necessarily treat me well. To the contrary, he'd pick on me and antagonize. He pretty much stayed my bully. It was just it was consensual, and that was part of our culture growing up. Was that like as boys growing into men, um, it wasn't socially acceptable to express kind feelings or thoughts or what, like you can't say I love you to your friend. What are you, fag? So instead, we would pick on each other, and I may have done some of the picking, but I think for the most part, I just took it and tried to take it with a smile on my face. Like, I'd be lying if I said none of it ever bothered me. Of course it did. Um, but I don't know, man. kind of feels like I should say more. And maybe I will at another time, but I think we'll leave it here. Remember, you're a sovereign individual. Do what thou wilt.